Okay, everyone. So we are going to be doing a mix of asynchronous learning and synchronous learning, meaning that sometimes, we will be doing things at the same time, and sometimes we'll have lessons where you guys kind of work independently, you work at your own pace, and I'll be able to answer questions as we're at today is the debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists are those who are framers that want to pass the Constitution as is, following the Revolution, following the failure of the Articles of Confederation. The Anti-Federalists have pretty significant qualms with what exists in the current Constitution. The Constitution is, and so these debates kind of last really, and they are still, debates that we discuss today. Okay, so the key discussion, the key argument really is how much power should go to state and national governments. Okay, how are we going to divide in this country between powerful? The Articles of Confederation gave those state governments a lot of power. States were pretty much their own independent nations, just kind of loosely brought together in a confederation. The Federalists are arguing that in order for the country to be successful, we need to have a stronger national government. We need a central power with checks and balances that can better provide for welfare, can better provide for the goals of the overall Constitution. Okay, so it's a disagreement between who should get power, kind of lead us to this debate. The first, obviously, is the Revolution. We have fought against a tyrannical government that has used and abused their power against the former colonists. So people are naturally going to be pretty fearful of a strong national government. They don't want tyranny to take over once again. However, the other thing to keep in mind is the failure of the Articles of Confederation, or the AO. Confederation did not give enough power to the national government. And as a result, we were incapable of doing certain things. We couldn't put down Shays' rebellion, naturally raise and pay an army. States weren't able to reach consensus, and under the Articles of Confederation, it took a significant number of states to agree on something in order for legislation to be passed. And it was just too difficult to get passed any meaningful laws under the Articles of Confederation. And so the Federalists create this Constitution. They create this document where, we could have a stronger federal government. But that is arguments. It's based on a lot of things. It's based on the fact that you have, in a sense, the rich arguing against the poor, those with power arguing against those without power. We'll get more into that tomorrow, but what we're going to look at first is the ideological debate. Okay? What we have here are 6 things that were essentially being argued by the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, okay? They were discussing selfish interests, authority, and participation, 2 clauses within the current Constitution, the Supremacy Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause, as well as the role of individual liberties and executive power as listed in the Constitution. Okay? the heart of these selfish interests and common welfare is essentially saying we are a huge nation, says the Anti-Federalists. We are states which take up pretty much the entire eastern seaboard. It's going to be very difficult to decide on common welfare. Each state has different needs. And if we give too much power to a national government, then the state will not be able to account for all of the specific welfare needs of each individual state. Okay? If we are to have this type of republic, it would only work in small communities. So, essentially saying, let's give more power to the states. The federal, and they say that what happens when you have small republics is that they get destroyed by selfishness. So we have small republics don't work. People become too involved in looking for power and controlling that small community, that if we had a larger government with, very notably, checks and balances, divisions of power, then we guard these selfish interests. Small republics don't work. Checks and balances stop selfishness. The anti-federalist argument, the federalist response. If we're continuing to look at things like central authority and active participation, it goes back to what we discussed last week about trying to promote democracy as much as possible. And so if you're thinking about the power of this limiting participation, originally the capital of the country and where this national government would be based is New York City. And so all of the southern states feel that, you know, if you put all of this power up here in the north, then we are not going to be able to actively participate, which is something that we fought for. And so when you take into account just the size of the country and where you want to put the capital, limiting participation, and you're giving too much authority to that national government. But again, the Federalists respond and they say, you know, pay more attention to these checks and balances. If we ensure that each branch of this government can stop, you know, one another from being too powerful, then we can limit tyranny. If we are able to limit tyranny, then we can make sure that everyone is able to participate, no matter where the capital is. Eventually, a from New York City to Washington, D.C., making it easier for all of these states to convene together. Okay, so these are kind of based on checks and balances. These next two are clauses in the Constitution. And essentially, both are saying that too much power is being given to the central government. Okay? Both of these are arguing that in these clauses, too much power is being given to the central government. So we see this in Article 1, in the Section 8 in the clauses, where it's essentially said the federal government always supersedes the state governments, and Congress has the ability to do whatever is necessary and proper to pass the laws that are seeking out the fulfillment of their responsibilities in Congress, okay? They can do whatever is necessary and proper in passing laws to make sure that they can fulfill their responsibilities. And the states have a big issue with this. Of course, the federal government already having power over the state, the entire existence of state governments. If the federal government's always able to jump above them, then that's always going to limit the power of states. Here, with necessary and proper, the anti-federalists are saying you need to set some very clear limitations to what the national government can and can't do. If you're saying they can do anything essentially to fulfill their responsibility, totally abuse that power. Okay? So far, we're really looking at the abuse of power governments. Again, what the Federalists will say here is that these clauses are coming about because of the failures of the Articles of Confederation. Okay, the reason that this Constitution even needs to take place is because we need a national government that comes to trade, when it comes to currency, when it comes to raising a military. AOC showed that states were incapable of doing this on their own. And the federal government needs to have these types of powers and be able to make these decisions for the entire country rather than waiting for states to individually decide, okay? The last thing we'll discuss is these individual liberties and executive power. So with individual liberties, what you need is a Bill of Rights. What we discussed last week was one of the key themes throughout the Constitution is the idea of limited government, making sure that the government can only do whatever the people want from them. And that includes demonstrating the rights that all American citizens have. Without this Bill of Rights, you cannot truly have a limited government. What the Federalists say is that you don't really need a Bill of Rights because under the current, laws of the Constitution, when it comes to checks and balances, the national government doesn't have the power to, take away individual liberties. It's seen throughout it. We see it, as I said before, with the demonstration of limited government. We see it with how we give the power to the people. We see it with, the sovereignty that we have over the government, and that the government serves to protect the liberties of people. But these anti-federalists argue we need to establish very clearly. If not, this government will no longer be limited. And the last thing is this executive power that they disagree over. The anti-federalists say we are going to see the same thing that happened in England. We are going to see a monarchy. If you give too much power to this executive branch, we're going to see the same levels of tyranny that we saw before. And what the Federalists argue, again, is that strong executive. We saw the failures of the article. if we are able to avoid that, it is only because we have a strong executive branch. Again, checks and balances come into play. The executive branch is checked by the judicial branch and the legislative branch, and that is how the Federalists respond. So if we're looking at kind of a key summary, we have this debate. What is the relationship of power between the national government and the state government? How do we ensure that we have a strong national government without overstepping the bounds of the state government and taking away personal liberties? The anti-federalists say we need to figure out a way to shrink the size of this federal government, give more power back to individuals and to states, whereas the federalists have a strong national government, then we will be able to ensure the longevity of this country. What we're going to do tomorrow is we are going to examine Brutus and the Brutus 1 and the Federal Farmer. What these documents do is essentially explain these in more detail, and then we'll begin a Federalist anti-Federalist debate that will take place throughout the rest of the week. So I will be in the meeting. Let me know if you have more questions.